And now, the survival show that once survived being attacked in the middle of the night by a Mohawk tent. In this episode, we sit down with our outdoor equipment expert. He's going to share with us his inside knowledge on camping gear essentials. Welcome back, your buddy, Marshall of GoingGear.com. Howdy, and welcome to In the Rabbit Hole's Urban Survival Podcast. This is episode number 159. I'm your host, Aaron, and you are in the rabbit hole, safe and sound. Marshall, man, it is so great to have you back in the rabbit hole.
Thanks for having me again.
So today we're probably going to end up geeking out a little bit about lights and knives at some point, I'm sure. But today we're actually going to talk about camping gear.
Sounds good. What you got?
So let's start with tents, because that's the big ticket item. Let's start at the top there. Let's start with a generic question. What makes one tent better than the other for your average camper?
It's going to come down to pretty much the same thing as anything else you're going to see in the outdoor world. It's going to be materials. And in the outdoor world, unlike a lot of other industries, the more you pay, the smaller and lighter it's going to get. So not wanting to have a bunch of weight on your back can get pretty expensive. And there's a couple different ways you can do that. One, you can pay a bunch of money and get something that's lighter, or you can take something that's less comfortable. So it's kind of a balancing act about which way you want to go, because you could go with a tarp tent, some super lightweight thing that you could, basically stuff in your pocket and not have a whole bunch of weight. And, I would say that they aren't too expensive, but you can get some super duper expensive tarp tents. But on the whole, tarp tents are generally less expensive than your regular tents. And you can go really small and really lightweight, but you're sacrificing a lot of comfort. Like here in the Southeast, I do not like tarp tents because you wake up covered with morning dew, and that's not really a lot of fun. So you're talking about single wall versus double wall at that point, where a single wall is just a single layer of fabric, and double wall is what you think of as your more traditional tent, where you have like a mesh outer or some kind of fabric or inner part of it, and then a rain fly on top of that. And a lot of times that'll help with airflow and help combat the morning dew and things like that. So I guess that's really a long way of going about saying the biggest thing is going to be materials when you're talking about cost.
Okay, and I guess that also depends on what kind of camping somebody's going to do, as far as car camping versus backpacking versus ultralight backpacking versus mountain climbing or something.
Yeah, absolutely. The car camping tent that I have, I would never in a million years take backpacking, probably because I couldn't fit it in any of my backpacks, and it weighs like 18 pounds.
Yeah.
But it's awesome. I mean, like multiple people can stand up in it. It's this really heavy, durable fabric. It's really sturdy. So, I mean, you could put it in like, I wouldn't say a hurricane, but some pretty intense wind and it'd be fine. But, I mean, that's some serious weight. I mean, you're talking about 18 pounds in backpacking. That's like most of your gear.
Yeah.
And for a lot of people, that's all of your gear or more than what they're carrying. So, yeah, intended use is also definitely a big factor. There's backpacking tents. There's car camping tents. There's ones that are kind of in between. You've got ultralight tents. It all depends on what you're going after. Okay.
So like when it comes to base camp tents, because I know a lot of people, when they're looking at nicer tents for car camping, they'll look at the tents that qualify as base camp tents. Is there anything really different about a base camp tent other than maybe it's just heavier materials and it's bigger? Or
those are honestly the two biggest things.
Okay.
I mean, when you're talking about a larger size, you're talking about heavier materials, the support structure needs to be a lot more significant. So if you look at the aluminum poles, which is what pretty much everything uses, either aluminum, titanium, or carbon fiber, but any of the larger ones are generally going to be aluminum, or on your lower end stuff, you may see some stainless steel. But the aluminum is just more substantial. So, I mean, you've got things that can maybe handle kids better, handle pets better, thicker materials on the base or the bathtub of the tent. So so they can handle like dogs' paws better, handle abrasion better. Just bigger, heavier, thicker, more durable materials, and a lot more of it. So that's what you're generally getting in a base camp or car camping tent.
Okay. Marshall, let's break there for a quick message for listeners. Listeners, do you get value out of ITRH? Awesome. Consider becoming part of the ITRH Roving Horde Armada. We do a lot more around here than just this show. Find out more about all the extra great benefits membership gets you by visiting itrh.net. Do it today, and you'll help the show stay safe and sound. Now, on to our next question for Marshall. When someone walks into your store and they say, I need a tent, how do you kind of walk through evaluating what's going to fit them best?
So I'm going to completely invalidate everything I've been saying, and we honestly try to talk most customers out of tents. In the South, a lot of the market has gone towards hammocks instead of tents.
Mm-hmm.
I understand in a lot of the parts of the country that is not very realistic. Even in the South, there are some areas where you can get above the tree line, or not necessarily above the tree line, but up to where the point where the trees aren't necessarily as substantial and it's harder to hang a hammock. And there's some areas where you're not allowed to hang a hammock. So we do sell tents. We have them in our store. We just usually try to talk people into hammocks. But if somebody's looking for a tent, it's kind of the stuff that we've already talked about. It's what their intended use is, how much they're willing to spend. And those are the two biggest factors. So, I mean, if somebody's going to be backpacking with something, we're not going to try to sell them a 10-pound tent. And vice versa. If they're like, hey, man, I'm going up to the Smokies and I'm going in the established campgrounds, that's all I'm ever going to do, I'd sell them something bigger than a backpacking tent because you get more space. I mean, especially if you have a family, you have room for your kids. One thing that a lot of people don't understand about backpacking tents, especially, is when they talk about the man size. So if you say a 1-man, 2-man, 3-man, you're talking about physically like your average adult male, so a 6-foot-tall male, 3 of those in a 3-man tent with 0 other things.
Mm-hmm.
If it can fit anything else, that is a big bullet point, a big selling point, and something that the manufacturer will harp on because it's so rare.
Yeah.
When they say a 3-man tent, it's 3 people side to side, and not even just side to side. You usually have to arrange them where you're in mummy-style bags, and the dude who's next to you, his feet are next to your head. So you have to kind of arrange them in that fashion, 3 people in a 3-man tent. So a lot of people, I sure don't like sleeping like that. I usually get a lot of people to go up a size. Either that or get something with a vestibule. So the part where the rain fly will cover outside of the tent and give you an area to at least put your backpacks, put your boots, stuff like that, just so you can have a little bit of extra space.
Mm-hmm. Okay, yeah, that makes sense. And it's funny, when I first got really back into camping, that used to drive me crazy because it would say 3 people. And I'm like, you can't fit 3 people in here, at least not comfortably.
No.
They're all kind of up in each other's business, 3 people.
Very, very comfortable with each other.
Yes, yes.
But I mean, if you're concerned about weight, I mean, that's a really good way to save weight.
Yeah.
A 3-man tent weighs more than a 2-man tent if you're looking at the same series of tents from the same manufacturer. And a lot of times it's a significant amount of weight.
Mm-hmm.
The 2-man may weigh 4 pounds and the 3-man will weigh 6 pounds. So, I mean, it's more weight, it's more stuff to carry. And again, it's a lot of this stuff in backpacking especially is a balancing act of how much money you want to spend versus how comfortable you want to be versus how much you want to carry. So you kind of have to decide what's most important to you.
Yeah.
For me personally, it's comfort.
Yeah.
I really like having a good night's sleep, which is another reason that I recommend a lot of people get hammocks, because you can get a small, compact, lightweight thing that you can be super comfortable in. So I love hammocks, and we pretty much everybody in the stores, that's all we use, and we try to talk all our customers into them too.
So I'm guessing when you're talking about hammocks, you're not, because I think I've seen one that's like a 2-person, but it's not like really meant to sleep 2 people. And so
you can do that.
Yeah.
It's Yeah, I mean, no.
I mean, like if somebody
It's
wanted to
like,
go for a romantic camp out, hammocks don't seem like
I
a good
love my
option for
wife
that.
and I love being with her, but no. I mean, you're basically if you're comfortable with spooning with somebody for 8 hours
Yeah.
and like feeling every bit of movement, which that can be fun too.
And the
But
10 million BTUs women seem to put out when they're sleeping.
yeah. Um, yeah, I mean, when they say it's a two-person hammock, it's more of like, hey, two people can hang out by the creek kind of thing. What we recommend a lot of the two-person hammocks from brands like Eno or Grand Trunk or any of the other like parachute style hammocks, because it's enough fabric to wrap around yourself,
Okay.
which is kind of nice. If you're just doing a day hike or something like that, you can take the hammock fabric and wrap it around yourself to keep the bugs off, or even give you a little bit more warmth. And they do make bug nets and rain flies and stuff like that, but it's a nice option to have just to kind of keep some stuff off of you.
So what is it? I mean, is it besides the weight, or is it just the weight that you love hammocks so much, or what is it that is so exciting about hammocks?
I mean, weight is one of the things. So if you look at the backpacking tent world, yeah, you can get some super duper lightweight tents. You can get the tarp tents and things like that. But in my opinion, you're really sacrificing a lot of comfort. You're going to be up against the ground, obviously, for one thing, and you have sleeping pads and you have cots and stuff like that, but you're saving weight to add in weight somewhere else.
Yeah.
With the hammock, you can be really comfortable, you can have a really lightweight option, and I would say you can not spend a ton of money, but when you get the whole setup, it's not exactly the cheapest thing in the world.
Mm-hmm.
So you're still looking at about the cost of a tent when you're looking at the whole hammock setup with the hammock, with the straps, with the bug net, with the fly. But it's not an unreasonable amount of money. You've got companies like Hennessy that make that total setup for like $140 for a backpacking hammock, and it comes in around 2 pounds. So
wow.
You got something that's relatively small, lightweight, comfortable, can keep the elements off of you, and I say it's comfortable. It's super duper comfortable.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people think of the traditional hammock as kind of like the banana shape, where you are in a kind of a banana shape yourself, and that's the way you have to lay in it. But you can lay in them diagonally, so you can lay on your side. And brands like Hennessy that are making what are called asymmetrical hammocks.
Okay.
So let's. I usually do this demonstration in person, so I'm trying to think of how to describe it best for people who are just have audio only.
Mm-hmm.
So if you think of your traditional hammock, you have it basically gathered up at the ends, right?
Mm-hmm.
So your stress points, you can lay diagonal to them, where you're kind of pushing the fabric out with your head and your feet, and you can do that, and you can get pretty comfortable and lay a little bit flatter. The Hennessy hammocks, if you think of a square, they're not a square, but if you think of a square and you think of two opposing corners, that's where you're hanging from. Well, the other two corners that you're not hanging from are where you lay. So you're laying against the stress points. You're kind of laying opposite the stress points, so it's really easy to lay flat and lay super, super comfortably. That's a big reason why I like them. And we kind of talked earlier about tents with morning dew. I've never woken up wet in a hammock. So, I mean, you have enough airflow where you've got plenty of airflow to combat all the morning dew. Anyone that lives in a humid climate knows that you wake up and you're just soaking wet.
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't happen in hammocks, or it's a lot less likely. And anything that a lot of people that are not familiar with hammocks, they're probably thinking like, cold weather, elements, bugs, and all those things. There's a lot of people that are doing this, and they've thought of a lot of options for all of those things. So I mean, you can get treated fabric to take care of bugs. You can get bug nets to take care of bugs. There's a bunch of different flies on the market to take care of rain. There's a bunch of different insulation options. You can use sleeping pads. You can use reflector pads. All those things to take care of heat. So anything that you can think of other than where to hang.
Mm-hmm.
That's the only thing that you don't really have a solution for if you're in a place, especially if you're backpacking. If you're car camping, you can take a stand or you can hang it from your truck or whatever. But if you're in like the desert Southwest where there aren't trees to hang from, then yeah, you're in a tent. But then a lot of the other things I was talking about, the morning dew and all that, aren't as big of an option or aren't as big of a problem out there.
Yeah, I have a buddy that's he's become super big into the hammocks, and we were having lunch recently, and he was bemoaning because they're getting ready to go out to West Texas, which is essentially, the area is going essentially just scrub brush and desert.
Yeah.
And he was like, no, I got to go buy a tent. And he's looking at me like, can I borrow? And I'm like, no, you may not borrow my tent, but go get your own tent. I've seen you destroy things. But see, that's interesting. And one of the things, and I know one of the things I was talking about to him, because I don't think he'd been out to that part of Texas, and it was like, it gets real cold at night. Remember, there's a huge gap in temperatures out there, and that reminded me about hammocks. That I know when I had looked at them a while back, that was still dealing with hammocks in cold weather was kind of still an issue because you still have that airflow underneath you. So and I think you started to allude to this a little bit ago, but how do you deal with hammocks in cooler climates?
I mean, it's honestly the same way that you would deal with it in a tent. It's just slightly different variations of that. So if you think about temperature variations in a tent, a lot of people think about the cold air above them. Well, the cold ground beneath you is actually a bigger problem.
Mm-hmm.
It'll sap about, I forget what the number is, but it's something like 60% of your body heat versus the other 40% above you through the air. So the ground is a big problem. Well, if you're off the ground, then you don't have to worry about that as much. You're more worried about the air. So it's the same kind of solutions that you would do when you're on the ground. One, you can just use a sleeping pad, which is what I've been doing for years. I've gone down into the 20s with just a sleeping pad, and then obviously a sleeping bag on top of that. The big problem that you have to think about with a hammock is that any sort of insulation is only good when it's uncompressed. So if you think about your traditional sleeping bag, be it synthetic or down, everything that's on the underside of you in a hammock, if you're just in a regular sleeping bag in a hammock, is totally useless. So you get down to probably, it depends on the person, I can get down to probably the low 50s until I get uncomfortable in just a sleeping bag in a hammock. Because you think about like your body being exposed to air, just sitting there, like how many layers of clothes would you need compressed to keep you warm? So I mean, yeah, you can layer up in some merino wool and stuff like that, but
there's the wool. I was waiting for the wool.
Oh man, you know I got to get into that. I'll mention knives and flashlights at some point too. But I mean, you can layer up on stuff, but still, I mean, if you're just standing outside doing absolutely nothing, you got to think about the point where you start to get kind of uncomfortably cold, just standing there, not doing anything. Not even just standing there, laying on the ground, or I guess if you can picture yourself suspended in the air. At what temperature do you start getting uncomfortable in compressed clothing? So you can't think about down jackets and stuff like that because that stuff doesn't work on your underside. Well, there's a lot of different ways to solve that. One is just a sleeping pad. So a sleeping pad that offers a decent R value, you just put it underneath you and find a way for it to not completely slide around. There's different options out there. So there's double layer hammocks. So there's a hammock where it's just 2 layers of the same fabric. You can slide the sleeping pad in there, sleep on top of that area, and it'll keep you warm. The hammock that I use doesn't have that, so I just got some silicone caulk and put some dabs of silicone caulk on it so it doesn't slide around. That's what I use. There's also what are called underquilts. So if you think of a sleeping bag, it needs to be uncompressed to work. It's a sleeping bag essentially that attaches to the underside of the hammock. So it's underneath the hammock. It's not underneath you. So it's uncompressed. It's uncompressed underneath the hammock, and that offers insulation to keep you warm. There's also reflective pads. So there's reflective pads that basically reflect body heat back at you. There's a lot of different options. I've seen people that'll take like the AMK. I don't know if you've ever seen these. The AMK escape bivvies, like the breathable emergency bags. Have you seen those?
Yeah. I actually have a couple.
Oh yeah. So a couple years ago, AMK came out with the escape bivvy, which the biggest problem with like your emergency blankets and stuff like that, if you've ever used one, I've used it just to see if they work, and they absolutely work, but you wake up in a puddle of your own sweat.
Yes.
I mean, if you think about all the off-gassing and moisture and everything that your body produces at night, you don't really realize how much there is until it can't go anywhere.
Oh yeah, I was recently wearing a Tyvek suit to run a hard network at my house, and it was like, even though it was cold, I would take off the Tyvek suit and my t-shirt and jeans would be sopping wet after about 2 hours of running around doing work in one of these Tyvek suits.
that moisture needs somewhere to go.
Mm-hmm.
Even in down sleeping bags and stuff like that, traditionally you want to take your sleeping bag out after you're done using it and let it dry out while you're making breakfast or getting ready in the morning or whatever, because of all the moisture that's built up in there. Same thing with synthetic. All your body's moisture builds up in the sleeping bag or clothes or whatever else. And those things, it doesn't have anywhere to go if you're in like your Mylar bags. So AMK a couple years ago came up with a bag that reflects your body heat back at you, and it's breathable. So it's a pretty cool fabric, pretty cool technology. But anyway, I've heard of a lot of people that'll put their sleeping bag inside one of those, or just sleep inside one of those. And I've never tried it myself. I don't know how warm it keeps you, but I've talked to guys that say they've gone down into like the 30s and been fine. So yeah, man, there's a lot of people using hammocks. So somebody's come up with an option to whatever you're thinking about, other than a lightweight portable place to hang. That's the only one that I haven't seen a solution to yet. And honestly, I mean, if you think about how much stress your body can put on something when it's moving around, I don't know if that one's ever going to be solved.
Yeah.
It'll be really cool if anybody ever does.
So how is it getting in and out of these hammocks? Because not everybody is in the greatest shape. And, we've got a few older listeners, and then we've got people like me who, like my Jen tells me I'm broken since I have a double fusion. How hard are they to actually get in and out of?
I mean, it depends on how you set it up. You set it up 10 feet in the air, and it's going to be in the pain in the ass to get in and out of.
Gonna need a rope
and it depends
ladder.
on the brand. There's brands like Hennessy, which I mentioned earlier, which they have a couple of different models. One has the bug net, where it's attached to the hammock on one side via a zipper. So you unzip it and you kind of sit down in it, and then you lay down in it.
Okay.
But most hammocks like Eno and Grand Trunk and a lot of the other more popular brands, your like parachute fabric type ones, all you do is you sit in it. So you sit in it sideways, and then you just reorient your body. You sit in it, and then you lay down. So, I mean, if you set it up properly, you set it up relatively close to the ground, it's really easy to get in and out of.
Okay. Yeah, I think I had played with a Hennessy that had like an opening on the bottom that you unvelcroed or something like that.
Yeah.
And you kind of like scooted in from that. It was this whole weird kind of birthing experience. Is that what?
So yeah, I recommend Hennessy's for people who are doing overnight stuff, and I recommend Enos for people who are doing day trip kind of stuff.
Okay.
And the reason is that Hennessy's and the brands like that are where everything's attached and they're more backpacking oriented. One, they're harder to set up. Not that they're hard to set up, but an Eno, if you get their straps, like the slap straps or the Helio straps or any of their ones, you can seriously set them up in like 30 seconds.
Oh, wow.
They're super easy to set up. That's just the hammock. If you put the bug net and rainfly, you're adding in some time and everything. But just the hammock, you can get set up really, really quickly. And that's awesome for day hikes. So, I mean, imagine going on a day hike and not having to sit on a dirty patch on the ground or a dirty rock or wherever else you normally sit, where you can just string up a hammock and sit by a creek or something like that and eat your lunch, or just sit there and read a book or do whatever you want to do in the woods.
Mm-hmm.
I love Eno hammocks and the similar brands for stuff like that. For overnight stuff, I like my Hennessy because I find them a lot more comfortable to sleep in, because I think they're easier to lay flat in, and that's pretty much it. I find them more comfortable for overnight stuff just because of how much easier it is to lay flat. But they do take more time to set up. They are harder to get in and out of. So again, it's like a lot of the other stuff we're talking about. It's a balancing act.
Okay. So when you say it takes longer, like, what are we talking about?
5 minutes at most.
That's not that long.
No, it's not. It's not. But at the end of the day, when you're backpacking and you don't necessarily want to spend a lot of time setting anything up, everything that you have to do, you're like, oh, I don't want to do this.
Yeah.
But, when you're in the middle of the woods and you're kind of separated from technology, everything's really not that bad. Even if it takes time, I don't mind doing it, because what else are you going to do? And you're in the middle of the woods, and that's awesome. So
yeah,
I usually don't mind it.
Okay.
Depends on how hard the trail was, I guess.
Yeah. So circling back to like ground tents, I guess we'll call them. Because we've talked about the brands that you like in hammocks. So that we can kind of close off that part of tents, what brands do you recommend when it comes to kind of ground tents, I guess with traditional poles and all that stuff?
Man, honestly, if you go, it's like a lot of the other stuff we're talking about.
Hmm.
If you go to a reputable store and you look at the stuff that they're selling, probably anything that they're selling is going to be fine. If you're looking at a backpacking tent, you're looking at probably starting out at least $200. If you're looking at a car camping tent, you're looking at about 400 or three to $400.
Yeah.
Starting out. And of course, those are full retail prices. You can always get things cheaper, or you can try to get things cheaper anyway.
Hmm.
Sometimes you can't, but you can find stuff on sale pretty often from us and from other people. But we sell Marmot, we sell MSR. Those are the two main brands that we sell. There's some other stuff out there. Big Agnes makes some good things. There's a decent amount of good tent brands out there. I know North Face makes some stuff. Mountain Hardware makes some stuff. And I've owned both of those in the past, and they make good stuff. Um, Honestly, like I said, if you go to a reputable store, if you go to an outdoor store that isn't carrying like the bottom of the barrel kind of things,
Hmm.
you go to like an REI level kind of store, then whatever they're carrying is probably decent quality.
Yeah, I think a friend once did not take our advice and went to a bottom of the barrel store for his first time to go camping with us. And we told him two things: don't go to the bottom of the barrel store. And the next thing we told him was, when you get your tent home, put it together. Because invariably, we always end up somewhere putting our tents together in the dark. And I was like, you need to know what it's like first, and you need to make sure all the parts are there.
Yep.
And he got out there, and it was a 2-pole tent that was missing a pole. So he had a Mohawk tent for the evening, which was, of course, slapping the tent to the third guy we were camping with. And then those two were bickering all night. So I actually got up and moved my tent in the middle of the night, so I didn't have to deal with those two. But
I can't tell you how many times we've heard like that exact story.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I mean it's really common for parts to be missing, or it's the first time you set it up and you bend a pole the wrong way, and all of a sudden,
yeah.
If you buy a bottom of the barrel tent and you're setting it up for the first time in the middle of the night, you probably don't have the foresight to have any kind of tent repair stuff with you. So you break one of those poles and man, you're screwed. I mean, there's ways you can kind of jury rig some solutions to get it fixed. But chances are, if you bend that pole the wrong way and it snaps or gets a crease in it, like that's it.
Mm-hmm.
So that you bring up a really good point. Talking about the bottom of the barrel stuff, what do you get on that versus buying a decent tent? And I started talking about, starting at about $200 for a decent backpacking tent, $300 for a car camping tent. You can, of course, go to Walmart and get $80 to $100 tents. What's the difference between those and your nicer tents? The biggest difference that I've seen is obviously durability, because they're not using the highest quality things, but the ability to keep moisture out. So I've been going up to the Smokies for like a week, at least once a year since I was 3 or 4 years old. So I've been up there a lot of times. And parts of the Smokies, maybe even the whole thing, are a rainforest. So it gets really, really wet there. And a lot of people don't realize that. So they show up with their Walmart tents, which there's nothing wrong with them, as long as you don't mind getting wet. And man, everybody is gone after the first night. They're supposed to have been there for a week, and you talk to the guy next to you, and you're like, yeah, we're staying here for the week. And then the next day they're gone. And or they're packing up and leaving. You're like, hey, I thought you guys were here for a week, and it's always because of their tents. The rain flies just aren't meant to handle a decent amount of moisture. A lot of them don't even extend all the way down the tent. So if you're just getting dumped on, like it does pretty much every single day in the Smokies, and a lot of times in the summer in the South, it does every single day. We get thunderstorms.
Yeah.
Your stuff gets soaked. You get soaked. They talk about how the sides will be water resistant or waterproof, and man, that's just not true. Growing up, my dad, we actually used Eureka tents, which are not super high end, but they're decent quality. I'd kind of put them, I know we're going to talk about packs later. I kind of put them around like Kelty in the pack world.
Okay.
So they're okay. They're not something that's ideal, but they're okay. But what made it really awesome is we had this big, huge tent, because it was a Eureka, like 6 or 8 man. So we had a ton of space, and it actually did a pretty decent job of keeping moisture out. But we put up a giant tarp over the whole thing. So we had like a 40-foot tarp or some ridiculously sized tarp.
Yeah.
that we would rig up over our entire tent and our entire cooking area. So there are ways to get around going super cheap on the tent. You just have to have the foresight and do a little bit of research to do it. And then, talking about that, you're adding in more weight, you're adding in more complexity, which do you want to do that? Some people, the answer is yes. Some people, the answer is no.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. And yeah, it's funny that I actually spent a month living out of a Eureka tent many, 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 many moons ago while backpacking through Colorado. And it was one of their heavier tents. But yeah, I definitely know what you're talking about because we got into certain parts of Colorado and it was just like, oh, okay, we're soaking wet every morning.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Man, they make pretty good quality stuff.
Yeah.
I haven't looked at their lineup in years, but it used to be like I would say that they're typical Boy Scout tent.
Yeah.
So they're good quality. They'll hold up well. They'll keep the moisture out, but man, they're not lightweight.
No.
Not the ones that I ever tried. And they're not using like your cutting edge materials that you're going to get from MSR, Big Agnes, or any of those other kind of brands.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and to be fair to Eureka, I mean, the last time that was 25 years ago. Maybe, no, it was 26 years ago when I did that. So, yeah. But even then, like I was messing with one a couple years back, just out of curiosity and nostalgia, and I was like, God, this thing's heavy compared to like my my Marmot tent.
Yeah,
so, yeah.
And they may make better stuff by now. I honestly don't know.
Yeah. Okay. Well, to move on past tents and get into sleeping bags, so we've got synthetic and we've got down, and I mean it's been a few years since I've bought a new bag, so
you got a mix of both.
Do they really? They mix them now.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, well let's get into that. What makes one bag better than the other?
The same thing as everything else. Is how much you want to spend, how comfortable you want to be, and how small and light you want it to be.
Mm-hmm.
So let's talk about synthetic versus down because that's everybody's first question.
Yeah.
For one thing, down is usually going to be a lot more expensive, but for the weight, it will keep you warmer. For instance, I love Western mountaineering. And full disclosure, like everything else we're talking about, it is something I sell.
Mm-hmm.
So I am slightly biased, but I sell it because I really like the brand. As a retailer, I have a choice of the kind of stuff that I'm going to carry, and I choose to carry the things that I like. So Western Mountaineering is one of those brands that I absolutely love because they make an awesome, awesome product. I always say that sleeping in my sleeping bag is like being hugged by angels because it's so comfortable.
That's a good sales pitch. I like it.
Man, it's so nice. But I mean, you're talking about their sleeping bags start at $300.
Wow.
So they're not the cheapest thing in the world, but if you take care of them, they'll last you your whole life.
Mm-hmm.
So down is going to be more expensive. It's going to be smaller and lighter, but there is a really big downside of it that a lot of people know about that's really easy to get around, but let's talk about it. It's if it gets wet, it loses all its insulating value. I think it actually will pull insulation or will be like negative insulation. It's like cotton when it gets wet. It's worse for you than having nothing. But I'm not 100% positive on that, but I know that it loses all its insulating value or most of it when it gets wet.
Mm-hmm.
But the thing is, man, have you ever slept in a wet sleeping bag? Have you ever done it?
I've actually never done that.
I have, due to poor planning and a crappy tent that I borrowed from my buddy that was not waterproof like he said it was when I was, 17 or so.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't have all the nice stuff that I have now. The first night, the campsite that we had, it was honestly just poor planning on our part and crappy gear. I was in a soaking wet sleeping bag, and I ended up just going to my car, and I was with my girlfriend, and we both went to our car and slept in the car because regardless, sleeping in a wet sleeping bag sucks. It is not something I would want to do.
Doesn't sound like fun.
It's terrible. Now, synthetic does retain some of its insulating value when it's wet. I think it retains something like 60%. Mm-hmm. I think 60% is just going to be my magical number for this show.
Okay, sounds good.
Yeah. 60% of statistics are made up, right?
Exactly, on the spot.
But yeah. But it does retain some value, but man, it still sucks. Mm-hmm. So if you're in a survival situation, yeah, I guess, having a synthetic bag, if it's going to be soaking wet, is ideal. But that said, don't get your bag wet. And it really is that easy. I know I just gave an example of when I got my bag wet, but if you use some like super, super basic techniques, like opening up underneath your rain fly or opening up in your tent, making sure whatever you're sleeping on is always separated from the ground, whether it be on a cot or a sleeping pad or in a hammock, there's a lot of basic things that you can do. Actually, no, thinking back on it, I actually was on a really thin sleeping pad. The problem was our campground had flooded
Ah, okay.
with like 5 or 6 inches of water. I'm like, how did I get around that? Because I know I was on a sleeping pad and I was with my girlfriend. And so, like, the edges of the sleeping bag were in the water. So it
Ah,
was like
okay.
wicking moisture up
Yes.
into the sleeping bag. And it was a super cheap, like, crappy synthetic bag. But yeah, anyway, there's some basic stuff that you can do to not get your down bag wet. And then you get all the advantages of a down bag. It's smaller, it's lighter for the weight, it insulates better, and I find them a lot more comfortable. And again,
Really?
they last a lot longer. Synthetic bags, especially the lower end stuff, they'll lose degrees every year as your body oils build up in them and the fibers start breaking down and everything. If you use it regularly, you can expect to get a few years out of a kind of a low end synthetic sleeping bag.
Mm.
If you take decent care of your high end synthetic sleeping bag or your high end down bag, you can get probably at least 10 years, if not a lifetime, out of them.
Hmm.
So yeah, that's kind of my spiel on sleeping bags. I highly prefer down. If you are a person who thinks that you may get it wet at some point, if you're just not careful with your gear or you're a poor planner like I was when I was younger, then yeah, synthetic is probably the way to go.
Okay. So mummy bag versus the kind of just square rectangular bag.
So mummy bag is going to save you space and weight. And because it's a tapered bag, so all the extra material that would be making it a straight rectangular bag, you don't have that. So it also helps with insulation. So air is really hard to heat up with your body. So anything that is air around you in a sleeping bag, you basically don't want any of that, especially when it gets really cold. When you start getting below freezing, it makes it really, really hard to heat up that air. So your body's trying to heat up that air and heat up and keep itself warm. It's really difficult for your body to do. So a mummy bag kind of eliminates that problem because it's your body shape. So you don't have all these air pockets around you that you have to stuff clothing in or do whatever else or have your body heat up and keep warm. And you also don't have to worry about messing with the compression. So people say like, hey, yeah, you can stuff a jacket down into the bottom of your bag. Yeah, you can absolutely do that. But then you worry about maybe you stuff it down there a little bit too much and you start compressing the insulation. And like I talked about earlier, compressed insulation is useless.
Mm-hmm.
So ideally, you want something that's the shape of your body, which is a mummy style bag. And we've had bigger guys ask, like, I'm a bigger guy, I'm going to be compressing the insulation. Man, there's a ton of bigger guys out there, and there's a ton of options for you as well. So there's sleeping bags that are made to be taller. There's sleeping bags that are made to be wider. There's just make sure you get one that fits you well. Make sure you go to a store that'll actually let you try it out because that's really big. We have a cot that we just lay out for people, and they can try it out in store.
Yeah, that was another thing that same friend that wound up with the Mohawk tent. He did the same thing. He went super crazy cheap on the on his sleeping bag, which we told him not to do. And then he got there, and he also happened to be a big bodybuilder guy, and he couldn't get the sleeping bag up over about just below his chest. And so all night long, between him and the other guy bickering, it was listening to him complain about how freezing cold he was because he couldn't get the sleeping bag over. And we're like, again, we told you, try on the sleeping bag in the store to make sure your ass fits.
Yeah, for sure.
So, yeah.
I mean, there are some nice things about the rectangular bags. One, you can completely unzip them and use them as kind of a blanket, which is kind of nice for car camping, especially if you're with your significant other or your kids or something like that. You can get some big-ass air mattress from Walmart and have a really cushy bed, and you can take a mummy bag, or not a mummy bag, a rectangular bag, and lay it out on the air mattress, and then do another one on top of you. And man, that's a pretty comfortable way to sleep.
Yeah.
Like I'd sleep that way at home. Like it's a pretty comfortable, nice way to spend a night. So there are some advantages to them. But if you're going backpacking, if you're going even remotely lightweight, then mummy bag is definitely the way to go.
Okay. So now I've seen like, and I know a few years ago I don't even remember what I was shopping for, but I was somewhere and I was like, Big Agnes had a newer line of bags. They wouldn't be new anymore, but that it was like a couple's set of bags where they could be zipped together. Have you seen those?
Oh yeah, you can do that with pretty much any sleeping bag.
Oh,
So
okay.
you
I
just
didn't
have
know
to
that.
look at the handing of the zippers.
Mm-hmm.
So you just get one that's right hand, one that's left hand, and most manufacturers you can zip them together. Obviously, you need full length zippers for that to work.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's something that you can do with a lot of the different brands.
Oh, I didn't know that. Okay.
The one you're talking about from Big Agnes, I think actually had like a bigger foot box and stuff.
I
I know
think
the one
so.
that you're talking about, like it was even more optimized from couples.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're, a lot of the ones are made where you can zip the sleeping bags together.
Okay. I never knew that. That's
Yeah.
interesting. Huh. Okay. Well, cool. So when it comes to pads, because I mean that's been a reoccurring thing that we've talked about here. What do people need in a pad?
So there's three big things in pads, or three big things that I can think of. One is your closed cell insulation. So if you think of just like your typical foam pad that doesn't really compress at all,
Mm-hmm.
uh, the nice thing about those is if you get a decent brand like Thermarest or someone like that, is they're really lightweight. The bad thing about them is they don't really offer a lot of. They offer okay insulation, I guess. The R value isn't super high, but any of the thinner stuff, you're really looking at taking away sharp rocks, is what I like to say.
Okay.
So if you think about like laying on a sharp rock, you will feel that sharp rock slightly less.
Okay.
So that's what you're going to get with the closed cell stuff, which, man, that's enough for a lot of people. You know, a
Mm.
lot of people, that's all they want, and that's perfectly fine. Another really nice thing about them is they're really cheap.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're looking at like the Z Light from Thermarest, or the name's escaping me, but the Ridge Rest sleeping pad from them, which are kind of the two classic in that world, they're really cheap. So they start at like, you know, 30, $40. So you can get a really inexpensive one, and they're really durable. You don't have to worry about puncturing it. You don't have to worry about abrading it, because, I mean, if you think about like your typical foam or a memory foam bed or something like that, if you poke a hole in it, like, who cares? What does it do to it? It doesn't do anything to it.
Mm-hmm.
So you don't really have to worry about taking care of them. But that said, I find them super uncomfortable because they don't offer very much thickness. That's the biggest thing for me. I just don't find them very comfortable, and they don't offer a whole ton of insulation. Although Thermarest does something really nice where they put reflective materials on most of theirs,
Okay.
so they'll reflect body heat back at you, which is cool. And that actually does work really well.
Hmm.
So you do have that. And I'm actually looking at their site, and the R value on them actually is pretty decent.
Hmm.
So forget about that part that I said. The R value 2.2 on a Z Light, which is actually pretty decent for a sleeping pad. I always stay away from them just because of comfort.
Okay.
So if you didn't do those, the other option for forever was your self-inflating pads. And what self-inflating pads are they're foam that can be compressed inside, usually like a Cordura nylon outer, and you roll it and compress it when you have it in your pack, and then it self-inflates by that foam expanding and letting air in through a valve that you loosen up, and that's your self-inflating pad. It says self-inflating, but it's more like self-expanding.
Okay.
It is letting air in there, so I guess it's kind of inflating, but it's the foam on the inside that's expanding that's actually inflating it. And that was the standard for backpackers for forever. The Thermarest Pro Light, that was the standard for backpackers for a long, long time.
Mm-hmm.
The only thing is that thing's only 3/4 of an inch thick. You do have a pretty solid R value. I'm looking at their site right now. It's a 2.4 R value. So R value is how much better than air it is. Hopefully nobody corrects me on this. I don't think I'm wrong on this. So I'm relatively confident. But so like 2.4 R value will be 2.4 times better than air. But I think that's what it is. So like an R value of 1 is air, basically. So you think 2.4 is 2.4 times better than air. So that's pretty good. But the thing is, it's 3/4 of an inch thick on the Pro Light. Actually 1 inch thick. I'm looking at it. 1 inch thick. Which you think about like how much your body compresses your mattress at home. it compresses it more than an inch in most places, especially in the places of high pressure. Your hips, your shoulders, your knees, your head, whatever you have pressing against the ground, it's going to compress that a decent amount. And if you're in a rocky area, somewhere where you can't necessarily get to a kind of a flat, comfortable area where it's just nice, soft sand or dirt or leaves or something like that, it can be kind of uncomfortable. So again, it's kind of like the closed cell mattresses in that it is basically taking away sharp points and adding a little bit of comfort. But if you think about laying on a 1-inch thick mattress, I don't find them super comfortable. But I use them for years. It's not bad. It's definitely better than nothing. And at the very minimum, you want it for insulation reasons. For the reasons I talked about earlier. The ground is sucking a lot of your body heat out of you. You want something to insulate yourself. So at the very least, you want something like that for insulation. So inflatable mattresses where you actually have to blow into them have been around for a long time. I've had one for, probably 15, 20 years. And I'm not talking about your Walmart, like air mattress kind of things.
Oh, okay.
I'm not talking about those. I'm talking about the ones that are oriented for backpacking. They were basically the same thing as the Walmart ones.
Okay.
But they were smaller.
Okay.
So they're smaller, they're backpacking size, they're not as thick. But a really nice advantage of them, and the reason I use them, is because they're way more comfortable. I find them way more comfortable because most of them are at least 2.5 inches thick. And if you think about an inflated air mattress pad, 2.5 inches is usually enough to keep you completely off the ground, no matter how much your body is compressing it, if you inflate it properly. So you can keep yourself off the ground, and I find them super, super comfortable. So Thermarest, it's probably been, I don't even know, 7-8 years now. They came out with something called the Neo Air, which took a whole lot of that market. So like the mattresses where you actually inflate, they came out with the Neo Air, and some other companies have come out with some other really good ones that you actually inflate. And that's kind of where the market is right now, is the ones that you actually inflate. So that's where I see a lot of the innovation in the new technology. The self-inflating and the closed cell, they've kind of been doing the same thing for a while. So the ones that you actually inflate with your breath are where the market is right now. And the big reason is, again, comfort. But you're not really trading anything off other than having to inflate it yourself. You can get nice durable materials on them, so you can get really thick Cordura nylons that are really abrasion resistant. Obviously, that adds a little bit of weight. But if you're willing to keep halfway decent care of your gear, and take knives out of your pockets, and don't wear spiked shoes on your air mattress, like pretty basic kind of stuff. You could get really, really lightweight. Like I'm on their site right now, so I'm trying to see how much the X-Lite weighs. It's the one that I actually use. So the NeoAir X-Lite compacts down to maybe about Coke can size, maybe a little bit bigger than that, but it compacts down super, super small. R value 3.2, and on the small, it's 8 ounces. The regular, which is like a full body length, is 12 ounces. So you're under a pound for a 2.5 inch thick, really comfortable mattress. So that's kind of the direction I try to push people in. They are more expensive than some of the other options. They're pretty comparable to the higher end self-inflating ones, but they start at probably $80 to $100.
Okay.
They're not terrible.
Yeah, I think that's about what because I actually still have, because the last time I bought new camping gear was about 10 years ago. I have one of the self-inflating Thermarests.
Yeah, probably a ProLite or something like that. Yeah. That's the classic backpacking one for a long, long time. But the NeoAir has taken a lot of that business away because they're so comfortable. And
if it packs down that small and that light, that makes sense. Because like the stupid pad that I have, I can never get the thing back into the sack.
Yeah. So you can pack it down really small. They're comfortable. They're lightweight. Some of them actually have that reflective material, so they'll reflect body heat back at you. And if you're worried about durability, they've covered all that stuff. So they make ones with thicker Cordura nylon. We got some new ones in from Sea to Summit not too long ago. They're making some really cool ones that you inflate that have insulation in them. So they actually add insulation in them. So in addition to the R value of the materials and everything, there's actually insulation in there. So there's, I'm pretty sure it's synthetic. I think there's some guys out there that are doing some down-filled ones. You do have to blow into them, but there's some pretty cool ways that they have to inflate them. I mean, Thermarest makes little fans. They make pump sacks. I've seen some ones that use, I can't remember what the effect is called. The Bernoulli effect, maybe? Maybe some of our scientifically minded listeners will correct me on this. But it amplifies your breath. So, like, when you breathe in, the shape of it actually draws more air in.
Oh, funky.
So
Okay.
you can only, it takes, 5 or 10 breaths or whatever of just kind of blowing into it, and it'll inflate the whole thing. So they're coming up with some pretty cool ways to inflate them. But, I mean, honestly, it's, sitting down while you're setting up your tent and breathing normally into it for a couple minutes.
Okay.
At most. So it's really not bad. And for the comfort level that you get and the weight savings that you get, I think it's absolutely, absolutely worth it. So that's what I recommend to most people. The exception is, like, dad's buying their sons their first Boy Scout pad or something like that. Yeah, man, get the cheap one. If you're not sure that you're going to be into this stuff, don't spend $100 starting out. Get something cheap, and then if you want to down the road, you can get something nicer.
So when it comes to like the sleeping bag inserts, what do you? Is there a new merino wool thing? I mean, we all know about your wool fetish here.
I do.
So
man, I wish there was. I really wish there was.
Yeah.
I keep on talking to Icebreaker, who's my favorite merino wool brand, to make one of those. They haven't done it yet, but I keep on crossing my fingers.
That's surprising because essentially they just need to make a big merino wool sack.
Yeah, pretty much.
That's not complicated.
I say. I'm like, just give me the fabric. I'll have my wife bust out the sewing machine, and she can make one for me.
I'm sure she'd be thrilled about that.
But honestly, my choice is silk.
Okay.
I say silk, and the biggest reason is you can use it year round. I'll offer some caveats to that here in a minute, but for the most part, it's silk. And I say year round, use a silk bag in your sleeping bag, no matter what, because you are keeping you off of your sleeping bag. It is not easy to clean a sleeping bag. We have all the stuff to do it. We have the special washes and things like that. But, the more you wash it, the more you're breaking down the fibers and weakening the bag and messing with the zippers and trying to get body oils out and trying to get all that stuff out. Just avoid all that stuff in the first place. Sleep in a sleeping bag. Keep your funk, your gunk off of the sleeping bag. And you avoid a lot of problems. And I like silk because it doesn't really offer any temperature increase.
Okay.
And it also doesn't really cool you off. It's just kind of there, keeping you separated from the sleeping bag. Yeah, it probably offers like a couple degrees, but nothing significant. And it's also pretty awesome for people that are traveling. So if you're going to any third world countries or you're doing like the hostel thing, maybe there's issues with bed bugs or whatever, it's a good way to separate you physically from things. So I recommend year round, absolutely being in a sleep sack, keeping yourself separated from the sleeping bag. And they're comfortable. I mean, if you think about sleeping in silk, that's pretty comfortable.
Yeah, it's like silk boxers maybe.
Yeah. So that said, we have a lot of people coming into the store that are looking for like 0 or 15-degree bags. And, maybe not the smartest thing as the person having the business and trying to make money, but I usually try to talk them out of that. And the reason is, if 0 degrees is the lowest you're ever going to go, I highly, highly recommend getting a 32-degree bag, which for a lot of the country is a year-round bag. In Georgia, it's a year-round bag, except for like 1 day every 2 years. And getting a temperature-adding sleep sack. So Sea to Summit makes some really nice sleep sacks that can add up to 25 degrees to your bag. So you get your 32-degree bag, you get your 25-degree sleep sack, and that basically takes you really close to 0. And they're really comfortable. So just like the silk bags, the sleep sacks that they have that add temperature, they're really nice, soft. Some of them are like a fleece material, but they're super comfortable to sleep in.
That makes sense, yeah.
Yeah, and again, they separate you from the bag. So they have ones that'll add, I think, 15 degrees, 25 degrees, and they actually have one that's made out of a Coolmax material, which if you're familiar with like Nike and a bunch of the other brands that use Coolmax, it actually helps cool you off. So it's pretty cool to use in the summer if you're going down to like the desert. Well, not the desert Southwest because it gets freezing cold out there, but like the coast of Georgia where the barrier islands where it's like 90 degrees at night in the summer. It's really nice to be in one of those to draw moisture off of you and to draw heat off of you. Yeah, I definitely recommend getting a 32-degree bag, which you can use year round, because even if it's hot, you can unzip it.
Yeah, that's what I
And
do
if
with
it's
mine. Yeah.
yeah, and if it's really, really hot, you can use just the sleep sack. You don't have to worry about taking a sleeping bag. So
Mm.
you can get those two things, and you have a year-round option for pretty much the entire world, other than Canada and the Northeast and places where it gets down into the negative degrees.
Yeah. So when it comes to like storage of bags, is it true that you're supposed to take them out of their compression sack and like put them on a big heavy hanger or something? Or
Yeah, absolutely.
okay,
You don't necessarily have to put it on a hanger. I do that. And if you have the space, do that. If you don't have that space, you can also just unroll them and put them underneath your bed or somewhere like that. Or pretty much every decent sleeping bag these days comes with a storage sack. You just don't want it compressed.
okay,
So whatever you can do to avoid it being compressed. I mean, when they're shipped to us and when we have them in the store, that's how we have them. We have them in storage sacks. It doesn't hurt them or anything. You just don't want to compress them. You don't want to start breaking down those fibers and keeping it compressed. Yeah. And on that note, a lot of sleeping bags will come with stuff sacks.
hmm,
If it comes with a stuff sack, that's usually the smallest that the manufacturer recommends that it goes. So if it comes with a stuff sack, don't get a compression sack and just crank on it. A lot of the manufacturers, the higher end manufacturers like Western Mountaineering, I think it's Western Mountaineering, maybe it's Marmot on like their super high end down bags, but a lot of them say don't compress it smaller than this sack goes because you're going to start breaking down the fibers and messing up the bag.
mm.
So if it includes a stuff sack, usually that's the smallest that they want it to go.
Okay. Okay, that's interesting. Yeah, I think my Marmot did come with a well, it actually I think it came with a compression kind of stuff sack.
Yeah, the compression ones, um, just don't crank down all the way.
Uh-oh. Oh well.
'Cause yeah, you can crank them down pretty far.
Hmm.
Go a little bit less than that.
Gotcha. Well, I'm probably due for a new bag anyway. Somewhere between tents and sleeping bags are these funky things called bivy sacks. What's the story with bivy sacks?
Really big in the military. So the military, I don't know if they still use it, but for a long time they had their three-piece system that like a lot of the different troops used. And the outer part of it was a Gore-Tex basically bag. So it was a Gore-Tex bag that you put the sleeping bag in, and you got in there, and it just kept the elements off of you. They still make them. You can still do that kind of stuff. They are not popular at all. And it ties back to a lot of what I've been talking about, which is comfort. I mean, not a ton of airflow in them. Not the most comfortable thing in the world. Obviously, you don't have any room outside of that. But a lot of people like them because they're super simple. You basically have just fabric. Some of them have a really simple pole setup just to get the part that's around your face off of your face.
Mm-hmm.
And they're really reliable because there's not a lot of parts to break. A lot of times, again, they're just Gore-Tex or some sort of waterproof fabric. So they're what's going to go wrong with that? I guess the zipper could mess up or something, but it still works. It's not like you have a bunch of poles that can break or a bunch of zippers or mesh that can rip or anything like that. A lot of people like the simplicity of them, and the footprint of them is a lot smaller. So you have basically the size of you. That's the amount of space that you need to have.
Mm.
So you don't have to worry about finding a place to set up a decent sized tent or finding trees to hang off of. You can just kind of lay down on the ground and go to sleep. I don't like them. Again, I tie back to the comfort, but they're an option. They're out there. They're getting harder and harder to find because people just are kind of getting away from them.
Okay. I guess tents are getting so small and so light that what's the point of a bivy sack kind of thing, especially if they're that uncomfortable?
A lot of people are kind of going the comfort route.
Mm-hmm.
So especially the younger generations, they're doing a lot of car camping. They're doing a lot of hammock camping. They're doing a lot of cabin kind of stuff.
Okay.
Or if they're going backpacking, they're going with kind of newer, more modern stuff like hammocks.
Okay.
Not that hammocks haven't been around for 20,000 years or whatever.
Right.
But that's kind of a relatively new thing for the backpacking world.
Mm-hmm. Okay. That makes sense. So Now, when we get to gear for lighting up our tents, what do we have in the world of? Because I know you and I were talking a little bit about lanterns before we started recording today. So, and I know like Goal Zero just came out with a more compact lantern that actually works with 18650s, which thanks to you, I've become obsessed with 18650s.
It's good stuff.
Yes, yes.
Phoenix actually has one too now. They have an 18650 based lantern.
Oh, do they really?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it's pretty nice.
So now you were saying you actually don't like lanterns, or you steer people away from lanterns.
I don't. I do not like lanterns. The one exception is for like a home emergency type use kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
I think they're okay for that. I think there's still better options. The really nice thing about lanterns is if you're in, like a hurricane-prone part of the country or tornado-prone part of the country where you think you're going to have a lot of power outages, or even the Northeast where, you have the nor'easters that knock out power for a few days and you may not have electricity for a few days. They're kind of nice because a lot of the lanterns, especially the more home-oriented ones, you can shove a lot of batteries in and they'll last for a really, really long time, which is nice. If you have kids like I do, they tend to turn on flashlights and then not turn them off. So it's not ideal in an emergency situation or in a power outage situation to not have lighting. So the ones that take a lot of D batteries or have a big lithium-ion rechargeable battery or take a ton of AA's, those are nice because you can turn them on and leave them on for a long time. Obviously, that's not something you want when you're backpacking. Maybe when you're car camping, that's okay. But if you're talking about backpacking, size and weight become an issue.
Mm-hmm.
And then you start getting into the more backpacking, more compact-oriented lanterns. So if we're talking about that world, I think there's better options out there. And the biggest better option is taking a flashlight and putting a diffuser on it. So you get the effect of the lantern, and you get a nice compact little flashlight. My favorite way to do that, my favorite flashlight right now is the Olight S1. It's a nice, really compact little 500 lumen flashlight, and it has this optional diffuser that you can put on it. It's really small, really lightweight, and it basically turns it into a lantern. So if you want to use it inside your tent or around your campsite, even at home in an emergency situation, it's 500 lumens. It'll easily light up a room. Obviously, you're not going to get the best battery life, but you're not going to get the best battery life of something like that on full output on the camping lanterns either.
Mm-hmm.
Usually the way that they get a lot of the longer run times is they basically gimp the output. So most of the camping lanterns, you're going to start seeing 250, 300 lumens when the LEDs and the batteries that are in there are capable of a lot more. But they know that people using lanterns aren't going to probably try to run them on 1,000 lumens for an hour because that's
they're not in there doing surgery in their tent.
Yeah, that's not really ideal, a lantern that only lasts for an hour.
Yeah.
But that said, you can do the same thing with a flashlight. They have these max outputs of a whole ton of lumens. Just don't use that. Don't use the max output. Drop it down to one of the lower outputs, put a diffuser on there. All of a sudden, you have something that's smaller, that's lighter than most of the camping lanterns out there, and you've got a dual purpose thing. There are dual purpose camping lanterns out there. There are ones that you can collapse them or flick a switch or something like that and turn them into a flashlight. But again, you've got something that's bigger, that's heavier than your typical flashlight, and added complexity. So I definitely think the way to go is to get a nice compact little flashlight and put a diffuser on there. You got a dual purpose, something that's a lot more versatile. If you don't want to go that route, I completely understand. We definitely sell a lot of lanterns. So there are plenty of people that are like, yeah, Marshall, whatever. Just I'm going to do what I want and I'm going to buy a lantern anyway. There are a lot of companies out there that are making some really nice lanterns.
Yeah.
We kind of touched on Goal Zero. They make good stuff. Phoenix just recently started making lanterns. They're making some really nice lanterns. Some of the classics like Black Diamond. Black Diamond makes some really nice lanterns that are really popular. So there's options out there if you want to do that.
Mm-hmm. Okay, cool. Because I know we were talking a little bit about the Snow Peak also. I think was one of them because I was talking about I like the cheap kind of UFO looking lights to put inside in the top of my tent. You were saying there's some nicer ones out there now than the junky ones I used to buy.
Yeah, Snow Peak makes a pretty nice one. I forget what it's called, the Moji or something like that. I don't know. And then Black Diamond actually makes a pretty decent one that came out relatively recently. So it's kind of like a it's kind of shaped like a boob. So it's like
I love boob
like
lights. That's awesome.
Yeah, like I do too. So I was instantly drawn to it. Um, but yeah, I mean, but again, you're talking about something that's bigger and heavier and more complex than just getting a flashlight. So it's totally up to you. There's different options out there. You can do whatever you think is best for your situation. I will say that one thing about a lot of the lanterns is they are obviously built as lanterns because they are lanterns.
Mm-hmm.
So hanging them from things is something that's built into the light. When you're talking about a flashlight, I was talking about the S1, and that has a magnetic base. So if you have somewhere magnetic and you want to hang it, you can just attach it to something using the magnet. But with a lot of flashlights, you would have to attach a lantern or come up with some way to rig it to hang it from something.
Mm-hmm.
That's built into most lanterns. So like a hanging hook or a little bungee cord or something like that is built into most lanterns, which is nice.
Yeah. Okay, that makes sense.
Wait. The black diamond is the emoji.
Oh, okay.
Just in case my black diamond rep listens to this, the black diamond is the emoji.
Okay. So now I should have brought this up a minute ago when we were talking about bags, but I've was recently somewhere and somebody had like a super lightweight, like maybe only 4 to 6 inches off the ground cot. Those look expensive and heavy, but it seemed like it was comfortable. Where do you sit with those, and what's going on with that world?
They're actually not that bad. So Thermarest makes a couple that are pretty nice. So the Snow Peak is the Hozuki.
Okay.
But anyway, Thermarest makes some that are pretty nice. They're actually really comfortable. They don't get you, a couple feet off the ground like your traditional cots, or like even the collapsible ones with the aluminum and the heavy Cordura nylon and stuff like that. But they're really lightweight. I want to say they only weigh like a couple pounds. So let's see. Luxury light and so they have the luxury light, ultralight, and then the mesh. And they compact down pretty light and at 2 pounds. So yeah, they're 2 pounds. They're really not that bad. And there are some parts of the country where that's really ideal. So if you're in like a marshy area or somewhere where you have a wet ground or it's been raining a lot and you want a way just to separate yourself from the ground, it's a pretty good option. And it's definitely in the weight range of something that would be reasonable to take backpacking. Obviously, you start getting into that, you get into a sleeping pad and a tent because you need to put it in a tent or some sort of shelter. You start talking about a decent amount of weight, so you're not going to be super duper ultra light, but it's a reasonable amount of weight for you to carry even when you're backpacking.
Mm-hmm. You bring up an interesting, point there, which is how much weight when we get into, we won't even bother with the ultralight, but just general backpacking with all this stuff. What is a reasonable weight to do this stuff with?
Man, as light or heavy as you want to go. I know that's a total cop-out answer, but man, I've known guys that'll do like ultralight backpacking basically out of a camelback.
Mm-hmm.
They'll take a bivy bag or they'll take a tarp tent and like one of the AMK SOL, the skate bivvies that we were talking about before.
Mm-hmm.
And you can get down to 4 or 5 pounds for all your shelter and insulation and all that kind of stuff. Pretty easily. That said, my pack weight, God, I haven't weighed it in a long time, but without the food and water, probably 15 to 20 pounds is usually where I am.
Mm-hmm.
But I kind of err on the side of comfort because I like getting a good night's sleep. And I guess I'm kind of spoiled. Over the years, I've gotten soft. I need to be pretty comfortable to get a good night's sleep.
Mm-hmm.
I guess if I probably did the whole tarp tent sleeping on the ground thing for a while, I could get used to it, but I'm definitely not used to it now. So I need it. I need my hammock. I need a decent sleeping bag to keep myself comfortable. But, those two things that I'm talking about, for me, I'm only at 3 pounds for both of those things.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm keeping myself warm. I'm keeping myself dry. I'm keeping myself sheltered for around 3 pounds, which is pretty darn reasonable.
Yeah.
I mean, the biggest thing that I always tell people to spend money on, or the one thing that I tell everybody that goes outside to get, is some sort of water treatment option. That may be a whole other episode talking about like water treatment and cooking. That'd probably be a good thing to talk about sometime.
Oh yeah, we could do a whole.
But both of those get pretty in depth.
Does water treatment actually get in depth?
It can. I mean, there's a lot of options.
So, Marshall, when I was younger, and a lot of the times you had to do sealants on your tents and stuff like that, and there was seam sealants, and then there was other kind of spray-on sealants. What's the deal with sealants these days?
You can still do that, and we sell that kind of stuff. And with most tents, the stuff does eventually break down, especially if you don't take care of your gear or you're using it really heavily. A lot of the seams can break down, and we have the stuff, and you can get it at most camping stores to rejuvenate it. That said, if you buy a halfway decent tent, you shouldn't have to do that to it out of the factory.
Okay.
It's just like buying a waterproof jacket. I mean, if you have to treat your waterproof jacket when you first buy it, you bought the wrong one.
You did not buy a waterproof jacket.
I mean, a decent tent from a decent manufacturer already has all that done from the manufacturer. The seams are sealed, the waterproofing polyurethane or whatever kind of coating they're putting on it. That stuff's applied from the factory and should last you a pretty long time if you keep decent care of it. If you start seeing anything like delaminating or the seam sealing kind of getting that crinkly look to it, then yeah, it may be time to reapply it. But generally, it lasts a long time.
Okay, all right. Well, cool, man. Well, I think that's going to wrap up the camping gear show, and we'll have to have you on again to do a camping cooking show.
Cool, that'd be exciting.
Awesome, man. Well, Marshall, I sure appreciate you coming back and educating us and schooling us on all things outdoor gear.
Thanks for having me.
For new listeners, a quick story. A while back, I went looking for a new flashlight, one that would really last me a long time and put out some serious light. I found our guest today because of the amazing in-depth videos he puts out. But goinggear.com sells a lot more than just flashlights, even if that's what they're famous for. Now, I'm not paid for this spot. I like Marshall and his company Going Gear enough he doesn't need to. It's where I get my premium quality outdoor gear, and I think you should too. Now, to comment on this episode and get resources, visit intherabbithole.com/E159. Now I have a question for you. Do you get value out of each episode of ITRH? If so, you should see what we do for the members. Check it out today by visiting itrh.net. Members get access to episodes a day early, encrypted forums to chat securely with like-minded people about preparedness, an invitation to the secret ITRH Armada Facebook group so you can chat with myself and other listeners all day long, a free copy of the book Owning Your Survival, 9 Steps for Surviving, Survival, and Preparedness, access to our famous Bob and Emergency Kits video class with special checklists, my insane ammo inventory spreadsheet. You'll finally have instant access to knowing exactly what you have on hand and what you need to shore up on. Access to every episode ever produced by ITRH, including one with a famous knife maker that was never aired. That's over 150 hours of survival conversations to help you get better prepared. And I'm adding new stuff almost every other month at this point, which includes a 10-part Getting Prepped video series I just completed and loaded this last week for members. Visit itrh.net today to learn more and become part of the ITRH Roving Horde Armada. You'll be helping to keep the show safe and sound. With that, we wrap up episode number 159 from the Lone Star State. Till next time, stay safe and sound.